Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We are here today with my old friend Tony Ponturo and partner, and Steven Justman, who has been a good friend for many years and has done one heck of a job in his career and building it and creating it and managing it. And I think it's a great story for our Wisdom Circle audience, both listeners and viewers, to hear about. So before I do introductions specific to Steven's career, I'll just throw it out there. Tony, how you doing?
I am doing good. There's a lot going on in the world today and in sports. How about those Knicks? You know, Speaking of sports and theater and entertainment, what I love about it, and of course, not everyone knows, but I live in Hilton Head, South Carolina now. And what I love to point out to people is that New York City is in many respects just like any other city, in the sense of, look at all these young kids in Central Park and Women's Rink and the West Village and all these things, watching the Knicks and partying, and for all intents and purposes, reasonably well behaved. It's just sort of great to see that, where a lot of people think New York City's sort of a hardened, calloused community. You see how they get infected by sports fever just like every other community. So anyway, fun time.
Fun time. And both of my sons, who've been Knick fans since they were 2, slept through important parts of the game and were woken up to see the very end, which was as dramatic an ending as you'll ever see. Steven, what was your take? Were you there?
I was not, but I think I'm still speechless. I'm still speechless in terms of what happened in that second half. And, I think, as Tony said, it's just a reflection of, the unscripted nature of sports. You could not script that. If the three of us sat down and said, what is the most compelling outcome for this game? We couldn't have come up with that.
Right.
No, that was just insane. So it is a great time. We usually keep the timing out. We have the U.S. Open coming up across the street from where I live, which will be a nightmare. So I'm going to go buy a lot of food, stock up the cabinets, and put them downstairs in the nuclear basement. But a lot of good fun. And thanks for joining us. So Steven Justman, I really admire this guy. He started out in the world we all have seen come and go, the traditional media world of Turner and NBC and other places, and has really created a path for himself that I find extremely impressive. I think, and Steven, as we go through, I'm going to go through it, then you can comment on it. It seems to me like the greatest move happened back in 2020 when you joined Goldman Sachs, and you are currently the operating advisor for the alternatives division. Not exactly sure what that means. Give us like a 30-second soundbite on what is the alternatives division.
Yeah, happy to. First, just want to say thank you for having me. And for those of us of a certain age, when you say the names Ray and Tony, you don't have to say any more. And to me, that's what success looks like, is when you can be just known by your first name. And, again, great to see you both. Anyway, quickly, the Goldman Sachs Alternatives is effectively just the private equity arm of Goldman Sachs. We like to think ourselves as the largest private equity firm in the world that no one's ever heard of. Because everyone knows Goldman Sachs is this large investment bank, but we have a very large alternatives platform, which effectively, again, is no different than any other private equity firm with LP capital and deploying that where we think that we can make great returns on our investors' money. And again, we don't get paid for trophies and championships. We get paid on returning capital to our investors. Period.
Yeah. No, so that's great. I had not thought of it. It's a great way to be in the private equity business with 2 words, alternatives division, which means, now I get alternatives to stocks and bonds and planning and stuff, but very cool. Okay, so very cool. And I guess that might have led to some other positions. One is you're on the board of directors of Excel Sports Management, which is a very cool spot, and we can talk about that as we go through talent and brands. Tate, which we'll talk about shortly. Screen Vision, which we all know and love from the 20 minutes of 20 or whatever. I don't know if that's a competitor or now they're all one. And on the board of advisors at Fever and Cirque du Soleil, which we've all enjoyed. So these are great jobs. And started under our old friend and past guest, Joe Yuva.
Sure.
And of course, the legendary Ted Turner. My condolences, because I know as the leaders that we all worked for, if it was Dan Burke or one of the Bushes, when the top guy goes, it hurts everybody who worked in that company at that time. So, I heard you had quite a fun celebration about that. So let's talk about the journey a little bit. So the Goldman turn, I think that was one of the first pivots of the career, but straighten us all out. Talk about.
I think. Listen, I think for really, your audiences, whether it be early career or even mid or late stage career, I think I would say kind of the lesson learned for me was really, careers as in life are iterative. And, I left NBC about 10, 11 years ago. I mean, candidly, Ray, I was asked to leave, as you remember, but, I look on back that time fondly, and I'm very appreciative of the pivot, the opportunity to pivot there. And for me, again, I think it wasn't like I walked out of NBC and says, gosh, I want to go work at Goldman Sachs as an operating advisor. I probably couldn't even spell Goldman Sachs candidly at that point, but I had the luxury of time, and I had a lot of friends, and I knew enough to know that the media business and that we knew. I just saw the headwinds. I saw enough to know, gosh, this is getting less fun, less lucrative, and I'm not sure I want to spend my time there. And I said, okay, let me go work at a private company and have the equity upside and kind of that poster. And I got into working in private equity as an operating advisor, and through relationships, which again I think is a thread through everything.
Absolutely.
Everything. I
Sure.
I didn't know one person at Goldman Sachs, but I knew people well that knew people well there. Simple.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
And I got there, and really what I went there to do, and what I thought I was going there to do, was to find my next job. It's like, I'm going to go, follow the money, and they'll put me into a portfolio company. I'll go help run it, and the rest will be history. And then I got there, and started spending time looking at investments, helping companies. And I said to myself after a while, I said, wait a second, I'm just going to do this. And again, it wasn't a plan going in, but and now reflecting on it, I think, it was, for me, I feel very fortunate. And Goldman, obviously.
So you thought you had a plan.
I thought I had a plan. Guess what?
Until you find out the plan is putting one foot in front of the other foot.
Exactly. And it just shows how life can be very iterative, and you have to leave space for that too. But I decided, I put the stake and I said, I'm just going to do this. And that was, over 10 years ago at this point. And I feel very fortunate. And as I can reflect on it a bit now, I say, again, and no master plan here, but I said, if I think back and say, what I was best at in my career, I think I understand markets and I know what winning strategies are. I think that's my superpower. I love the commercial deal, part of the business. And then I love coaching people. And whether that be the CEO or the first year analyst, I love coaching people. And candidly now, guys, that's kind of all I get to do. So I feel, again, very fortunate, not luck, but fortunate that I've kind of landed in this place. And my role at Goldman across a couple of our different funds is really helping the investment team think about these markets: sports, media, entertainment, technology as it relates to consumers, and where we can find winning teams, winning companies, and support them with capital, of course, and resources, people like myself and many others, to get them from A to B that much faster. And ultimately, I say, like, the many, many mistakes I made in my career, someone needs to benefit from that. And, I'm able to, help these companies say, don't go down that dark, scary path, because I've done that.
You've done that. Exactly. All right. So good. That brings me to one little slice that I wanted to talk about, because I saw it this morning, and that's that roll these days. Like, what was the last thing I read or saw? Because you're talking about brands and experiential and marketing and investing. And I know that there's one of the companies, and I won't name it, that's on your resume list. I didn't mention it. But in watching the news this morning, so I worked at ABC way back, and I still watch Good Morning America instead of the Today Show for some reason. Better. And I saw in the cage match that we have had constructed in front of the People's White House. No one asked or got approval that I'm aware of, other than, yeah, let's do it. There's a cage for the matches, and there's Bud Light signage at the top of the ring. And my friend Tony has strong opinions about Budweiser to this day, as do all of us, I think, who remember the halcyon days and those, but without going back in the day. Currently, Tony, I want to turn it to you. What do you think of the Bud Light cage signage? I guess I don't know if they're on the mat. They didn't show a shot of the mat. What do you think?
They probably are. Well, for our audience and for both of you as well, what a lot of people don't know, because my good friend Dana White doesn't really publicize it much, is that we, Anheuser-Busch, with Bud Light, essentially put the UFC on the commercial map. So they and the Furtado brothers, who bought the UFC for $2 billion and were starting to clean it up, if you will, make it more, viable in the sense for advertisers, knew they needed a traditional sports marketer, sports brand, leading brand in sports. And so asked us to consider it. We flew out to Las Vegas. We met with them. Long story short, Bud Light sort of gave, selfishly in my opinion, UFC credibility that it was okay to come in and embrace it. Keep in mind, we never did things like WWE because we saw that more as a different form of sport and entertainment, which was very successful, but we didn't think it made sense for us. So Bud Light sort of goes from the beginning of credibility for UFC and grew with it. What I'm observing today, after a very major slip up, 3 years ago now, and major sales loss, is how do they get credibility back with the beer consumer, and particularly, probably in this case, the male consumer. So, and they're wrapping themselves also a little bit in the flag and military and the fold community and everything else like that. So this is sort of an extension, I would guess, not being there as their marketing plan, that we're embracing the 250th anniversary. We are a partner in the UFC from day one. So we'll go back to square one. We'll embrace the 250th anniversary and be a part of it. I'm sure there will people that will say should be a commercial enterprise. I'm sure there'll be critics. I'm sure there's critics that the event's even taking place on the White House lawn, but that's sort of why I think they're doing it. I think they've stabilized the brand, but in the history of beer, and someone may correct me if I'm wrong, but at least the last time I looked at everything, a brand that went down, lost sales, has never gotten back up. Yeah. It just never, because someone else has come in to get, one in their own family, Michelob Ultra. So anyway, so we'll see how the reaction is, but that's so you're sort of my input.
Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, I think.
What do you think? Yeah.
Well, I think I look at it from the UFC perspective, and UFC, which and obviously kudos to Tony and team for having the vision of something that obviously was going to become a major sports franchise so early on. Not easy, and to do unsafe things like that. But I think I look at it from the UFC perspective is that for all the success that they've had, to continue to push the envelope, because I think that they understand is that the atomic unit today is spectacle, because you need to create spectacle for consumers to care, even at the UFC level, right? So that's why they're doing what they did in Saudi, what's what they did at the Sphere, and now they're doing White House lawn, is because they want to do things that are going to penetrate culture meaningfully, and obviously their brand partners, by and large, are happy to come along for that ride. So I think to me, like, I again, whether you think your White House is the right place or the wrong place, I don't. That's not obviously the conversation.
That's not the venue. Yeah, no, it's
I
just
think
more...
it's the fact that I applaud them for continuing to push the envelope, because they could just roll this out at any stadium, any arena, and people are going to care, and they're going to continue to do quite well. But they'll continue to, again, push the spectacle of and marry spectacle with sports, and obviously I think that they'll continue to see success around that.
Do you think they're growing their audience and their brand, or are they talking to the group has found them, they've been around, or are they just getting more engagement from their current audience, which is big enough to probably make the engagement count more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think even in this claw that's on that's on the lawn and everything around that's in the news, in the culture outside of the sports page, right?
Right.
So USA Today is picking up, the morning news is picking up, and to me, that's if I'm owning the UFC brand, again, I want to again get my brand, my name into the culture, and obviously to your point, right, reach different audiences, maybe that traditional sports MMA crowd, which I think they'll be successful in doing to the degree to be determined.
Yeah, no, interesting.
I think one of the things, let me just interject this, and I agree with Steven about the spectacle. I think the other element of the conversation is, think of the sports that continually are embraced by yesterday's consumer, current consumer, and the new consumer, which are ones that stick to tradition, which is the Masters and Wimbledon and the U.S. Open, and you can go on and on and on. And there's something about sustaining a certain tradition and, I will say, respect of the process in sport. And I think a lot of people, and this may be political, see Washington, the White House, the Lincoln Memorial, et cetera, as traditions that you don't want to touch. And so it's a spectacle, but it's also on sacred ground that may be not respected. And that's where I think you have a little bit of the rub, so I'll just add that perspective.
Yeah, and I think, and then we'll move on from this conversation, but that would be for maybe not exactly UFC's target audience, right? Because the group growing up wants extreme everything. And to Steven's point, it's about doing stuff like that. So there is a divide, forget political, just generational, of the way we consumed it. People used to wear suits and hats and ties going to baseball games, right? So I think it does, to your point, and I mean this, I agree with you, it does reflect on a portion of the country, and I'm one of them that looks at that and like, really? And then there are other people who are like, how cool is this, right? So anyway, that'll be interesting to see how it all turns out. And I guess we will have an 80-year-old president over the weekend. It's his birthday too. What a weekend. That's pretty awesome. Stephen and I talked earlier this week about sports, and I love this thought. The more I've thought about it, is in a portfolio, can sports be an asset class, right? Stocks, bonds, commodities, futures, gas, oil. You're going to bet on oil going up, going down. Can you just invest in sports, and Stephen, I want to hear your answer on this, and then we'll ask Tony what he thinks, because I don't know the answer to Tony either. So if you put sports into an asset class, which would be players, TV, I don't know the whole bucket. What was the thinking? I want to dive deeper on because I think it's something, we usually always said sports is a great place to be for marketers. It's live, it's hard to skip the commercials, blah, blah, blah. But it's even bigger. I mean, the NBA had, I think, at least 28 million viewers the other night. Those are not numbers the NBA has ever seen. So, yeah, Stephen, I'll stop and you go.
Yeah. I think this is kind of part and parcel to what we've seen over the last 20 years. And I think I would divide sports as an asset class into two buckets. There's teams and leagues, mostly teams, And then there's kind of everything else. So that could be services, technology, real estate, etc. On the team side, and certainly you both know this super well, is that that was really much more of a local business, right? Where you had local people, mostly men, in the communities that own these teams for years and years and years. And over the last, say several decades, you've had a massive amount of wealth creation in this country, and you have really the dynamic of scarcity. So I mean, a sports team is no different than a piece of art, right? It's a collectible, a very expensive collectible, and what we've seen is just the rise in franchise valuations because it's a finite supply against a growing demand, right? And that's just economics 101, first day of class. What we're seeing, I think the big thing that we're seeing, and one other point I would make is if you just look at sports teams as an investment, there's a high degree of non-correlation with the general stock market or just general economy. So if you look at periods of economic shock like COVID and the dot-com bubble crash and bursting, and you think about 2008 financial crisis, that didn't really impact sports valuations at the time. Now what's happening more recently is that as these franchise values are kind of bigger and bigger and bigger, $6 billion, $7 billion, $8 billion, $10 billion for the Lakers, forget valuation because it's really not necessarily a traditional kind of valuation conversation like you would at, say, Goldman Sachs or any other kind of investor in terms of owning a team and looking at fundamentals like that on the surface. But you're talking about like a pretty large check at this point, right? And so if you're Adam Silver or any of the other very smart commissioners, and really what I learned working at the NBA, working under David Stern, one of the many things I learned under David was that yes, we had KPIs and looked at the business, but the most important KPI in the entire league was what the next franchise sold for, right? And so if you draw that line out, and as a commissioner of a league, you're always focused on where's the next $1 billion, but also what's the next price of the next franchise sold. And at the price points we're talking about now, that's why the leagues are starting to allow institutional capital into the teams, because
that was the next point, right? Because typically they were owned by the Tisch family and the Kraft.
It was all mostly family or consortiums of families.
So how did that break open?
But at the price points we're talking about, just the out of pocket, forget valuation. They've begun to allow institutional capital in a minority position in the cap table, really to open up the aperture and open up the demand side of capital into these teams, again, to continue to support these franchise valuations. When Ballmer bought the Clippers for $2 billion, I thought it was an outlier. He just had the money and wanted the team. It didn't matter.
Right. So that's the place. I was thinking about where did it start? And I think you're right. It started with Ballmer. And, we knew he made $1 gazillion at Microsoft. It was the Clippers, $2.5 billion. He saw something or somebody told him something.
I can interject a little bit here because I was with Silver in his office when he was telling me the story, which was after the '08 crash, let's call it '09 or so, they couldn't sell a franchise in the NBA. And a lot of the owners had borrowed against their asset value because they had lost money in other businesses, with the crash. When Ballmer came in, whatever his incentive was, and how Silver handled the Sterling situation, which is, okay, you're done. Now we're taking the team, oversimplifying here. And it all of a sudden changed the dynamic of the asset value, certainly of the NBA and other sports. I'm sure there was other things to it, but I'll give you another little anecdote. Is I did some more informal breakfast advising, talking with Stephen Ross when he was, still is the owner of the Dolphins. And I always remember he said to me, "What do you think's going to be on my tombstone?" And this was a man who was in real estate for 40 years. I said, "It's going to be owner of the Miami Dolphins." So we can't forget. And I remember Fred Wilpon, now I'm telling a third anecdote, saying, "You know why I bought the Mets? is because no one knew who I was in real estate. And I'm dealing with all these big hitters. And when I bought the Mets, everyone knew who Fred Wilpon was. So, A, you have to have the dough, but also there's a little bit of ego drive going in this. And now, again, my opinion from 30,000 feet is, and now as you have these high evaluations, you have to bring in private equity money because it's very difficult for an individual to do it. So it's okay. We want to get our 4 and 5 and 6 billion now, but we can't do it unless private equity becomes part of it. So all of a sudden, rules change. Rules change to create new revenue. Period.
Yep.
Well said.
Tony, you've talked before about private equity and the impact it's had on sports. And why don't you let's talk about it with Steven here.
Well, one
the
thing
other
I want to
side.
compliment Steven and Goldman, I guess 10 years ago, Steven, you said, is that I think, having been in this game for a long time, sports and media is a very unique place and has a certain mindset. I remember, Steven, I remember if you remember the name Neil Austrian, who was Tagliabue's number 2, who came from Showtime. And I remember him saying at a Super Bowl, Tony, I've been in business, I ran a media company, but there's something about sports that has a whole different mentality that he was trying to catch up to. So what I'm observing, obviously with you and now others, is bringing in people who actually know the business and can advise those who have the money to invest in it. And I think it's very, very smart. And I would say you're a pretty big asset to that. So that's because it's going to be needed to keep the asset values up and growing. But you need people in the room that can actually say, other than you're a sports fan, Steve Cohen, or not to name people, or whoever, Stephen Ross, do you know about sports and media? And let me be an advisor with you to help you do that. Stephen, I'd be curious if you agree with that or you think I'm way off base.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. You know, one of my many pulpit speeches is sports is a closed ecosystem, and either you're on the inside or you're not. And it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And so, you know, I see lots of companies, lots of great companies, right? And sometimes they have a great product, they have a great service, but their biggest challenge is they don't have that access, right? And in some ways, access becomes that atomic unit. And obviously, that's where people like myself and many others and most private equity firms will have some flavor of advisor, operating partner, what have you. For that explicit purpose, Tony, is to help, they've been there, done that for years and years and years, can help guide these companies and accelerate, their trajectory because of access, because of insight, because of things they know or things they or people they know. I think that just we all know that it's just extremely pronounced in the sports market, is that either you're on the inside or you're not, and if you're not, you've got to figure out ways to get on the inside because it's just a tough nut to crack.
Well, you won't say it, but I will. Tony is executive chairman of Echelon Sports, and for the exact same reason. So, the two of you guys are good examples, and I think there's examples where there are companies that don't have any of that, and I think they're wising up to realizing you got to have somebody who was or is on the inside to grow your business. You can't just throw money at things and know exactly what the hell to do with it.
Business is hard enough, but when you don't have the access and you don't know the business rules, right? Because this is a very complex business with so many different stakeholders, and if you can't navigate that or don't have that that knowledge, it just makes it that much harder. And ultimately, in the world of investing, time is money, right? There's a time value to money, so it's not just go in a room and figure it out. Come back when you have the answer. There's
not making widgets.
There's a time quotient here as well, so that speed becomes a lot of ways competitive advantage. Right? It's not just table stakes; it's competitive advantage.
Steven, I have a question, which is somewhat selfish on my part, but I raise on some boards, and I'm on he said, executive chair of a small agency. We like to be Excel someday. We'll see. And on a board of Voight, which is a old U.S. sporting goods company that stayed relevant in Mexico, and now we're trying to bring the brand to the U.S. Mm-hmm. But as an advisor, as a board member, how do you see, I shouldn't lead the witness here, but it's important that whoever you're doing that with understands that you bring value. And so they want to feed from your brain and experience. Or do you also have to, like, hey guys, gals, I'm here, let me impose myself more than you're maybe embracing me to impose myself? What's your take on that? If
Yeah,
I didn't
no,
totally confuse the question.
that's a good question. Listen, I'm fortunate that my relationship with Goldman creates these very organic on ramps to the boards because I'm at the onset of the investment when we're kicking the tires and meeting the company and doing all of our diligence work. So once we the very few times we get all the way to the goal line, it's very organic. But I think the question's a good one, Tony. For me, it's been a great learning also because it's very different being on a board versus being an executive at the company, right?
Yeah,
You're not there to do the doing. You're there to advise, certainly govern, but also advise and help, and sometimes get out of the way, right?
mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's hard, right? When you maybe know the answer or you have the relationship or you've just been there and done that, like to let the company, and the management team do the work. So you really, I think the key thing is understanding, again, being on a board is very different than being a senior executive of the company, and ultimately really understanding whether it be your role on a board or trying to find a role on a board is like what is your real value proposition, because it's a little bit less of like what you've done, right, and how that translates into value for the company, right? And I think understanding those three or four things that you can bring that are unique and valuable and impactful to the company is really the key thing, because and what I try to do is find those three or four areas at every company, and what I kind of call is executive sponsor them. So it doesn't mean I'm doing all the work, but I'm in the boat, I'm rowing, yeah. I'm helping where I can, or if not, I'll get off the boat and get out of the way.
Get on another boat.
Yeah,
sometimes that's hard to get out of the way because it's all intellectually curious to me, and I like doing and getting my hands dirty. But again, that's not your job. And so
I always say to the co-eds at Echelon, I know I'm supposed to be at 30,000 feet, and I'm going to try to be. And if I start coming down to 20 or 10, you have, push me back, because I haven't been an operator.
You just have to pick your spot. You just have to pick your spots, right? And know exactly where your value is optimized. Because again, you're all in this together, right? You're just trying to drive the value and grow the company. So there's no like gotcha here.
Exactly.
Your incentives are aligned, but it's just, again, you were both senior executives, and if you had people coming in your office every day saying, this, that, and pointing their finger, you'd have probably a relatively adverse reaction. Is my strong hunch.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to a point you and I talked about as well that I think it really resonates with our entire audience, not just executive chairman and board of directors and advisors. Patience in a career. You use the term, because I said we'll hit on some great surprises and speed bumps in your career, but that patience seemed to really help you navigate, take the step back. Talk a little bit about, and you said some things earlier, and we talked about the path is really just, there's no path. You just have to take it, and you'll wind up where you're supposed to be. But you go first and tell me.
Yeah, happy to. I think the world's changed, candidly. I think when the three of us were kind of coming up in this industry, like I think it was a relatively linear path, right? You went from A to B to C to D, whatever that path was. That kind of felt like that was the track. I think the two things that have dramatically changed in just business is that it's no longer a linear path. If you said, I want to be the head of media marketing at Anheuser-Busch, or I want to be the president of Telemundo Sports, there's not one way to get there anymore, right? And I think that's a great thing for people. And I tell young executives all the time, like if this is the mountaintop for you, the good news is not one way to get there. The second thing I think is that, the world's flat, right? That wasn't the case necessarily when we were coming in as well. And the fact that, with technology and, and the internet, just the ability to access people and the network and leverage a network, even if you don't have a network, is that much more powerful. So I think that those are two important things. And then, to your kind of comment and question, Ray, like to me, I think that one of the lessons, and by the way, I would not say like I've lived this credo every day, but is just to, is play the long game, right? You got to play the long game. And we know now, maybe you didn't know then, but like, a year is a day, right? And, playing, if you play the long game, and make decisions based upon that versus short term, I think you'd be well positioned. And listen, and it's hard. It's hard to be comfortable in that gap where you have aspirations and goals and want to be, somewhere that maybe you're not yet, and just to be not complacent, but just comfortable. And that I'm on the path. That's hard, and to try and work on that muscle of being comfortable in the gap, but understand that life is iterative. I'm a living, breathing example of that. You say Turner, IMG, NBC, Goldman Sachs, what does not fit, right? Like, so I think I'm a living, breathing, example of that, is that life is iterative, and you got just, some of it's just like being in the right place, showing up. But I think that, the ability, particularly for those in younger career, mid-career, it's like, just, understand that this is a long game, and, leveraging that and the fact that there's not one way to get somewhere, I think opens up an aperture in terms of opportunity.
Yeah, when we did talk, we said how it was linear, and I kind of made it more vertical, like it was an elevator, right? Yeah. The higher up the elevator you went, the better your career was going. Now it's just like hybrid work, remote work, in the office, Instagram, Facebook, Slack, whatever.
But I think most people's careers, certainly mine, has been more chutes and ladders than an elevator. And I think that's reality. Like that's life, and that's okay. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Like,
exactly.
In the context of a long career that, God willing, we're all having, and we'll continue to have that. Like, that's okay. And listen, when I left Turner, I had a great role working for Lazarus and Levy at Turner, and I went to go work at IMG. I took less money. And people thought I was crazy, but it was actually, I had made a decision. I could only go up. I couldn't go out. Right. Yeah. And people thought I was literally out of my mind because I had a pretty good seat at Turner Sports. But to me, again, it was part of understanding. I was on a journey, and I knew that I needed to get some different muscles. Right. And going to IMG, I kind of say I got my MBA in sports, just because, walking the halls of that company. And, at that time, you just were exposed to the entire global ecosystem of sports. So to me, they paid me, but I should have been paying them.
Tuition, you never know. I do have one great story about just showing up, which I think it was a name that was a much more regarded one back in the day. Woody Allen once said that 80% of life is just showing up. Brian Beadall, who I've known for a very long time, started Classic Sports Network with Steve Greenberg, and they were invested first by Paul Allen. So they went to like the first Sun Valley meeting, right? And they were told, listen, you got on because somebody canceled. You guys were not on our list of people to go to Sun Valley. So just know that you need to show up on time. And this is a really disciplined few days. So just, don't screw it up. So they get to breakfast. It's called for 7:30. They get there at 7:20. Steve and Brian sit down at an empty table of 8. And Warren Buffett comes in and says, hey, do you mind if I join you guys? No, please, sit down. And then Bill Gates comes in. So by showing up 10 minutes early, sitting alone at a table at a conference they weren't supposed to be at, they got Nebraska, the state Cox was the cable operator, cleared, because they told Warren that they had this whole library of old Nebraska football. And Warren's like, are you kidding? And so he calls Cox, and 2 weeks later, they're distributed on Cox. Just one of those.
And I don't think anything's changed about that, right? In the world of technology and 24/7 communication, I don't think anything's changed in that.
No,
me being in the room, right? And like, I kind of say half my job is playing in traffic and just letting things happen organically. I don't have a plan when I wake up every day and figure and have it all laid out. But like, I know if I am in the right rooms, good things are going to happen. Right. Mm-hmm. And I've got 10 years, at my time, most recently in private equity, that I can give you a track record of how that's happened. Nothing that's happened with a real explicit plan, but just being in the right rooms, right?
Right.
And I think, again, everyone, now it's just so much easier to lean on technology. But I think for your audience, and particularly for the younger portion of your audience, that understanding that being, live and in person is really a competitive advantage. I would argue it's table stakes, but it's a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I think if Tony could hug you right now, he would, because he's talked about that a lot. So I think we're going to go with the 5-minute warning here to just talk about any final things.
You need a sponsor for this 5-minute warning.
Bring it. We'll promote it, and it's a great idea. But so no, that was a great way to just, you got to breathe, you got to be patient, you got to show up, and you got to know that showing up in the right room and being patient and being you.
And then sometimes easier said than done.
Yeah, but Tony, once again, I want to make sure I'm not asking you to interrupt your co-host.
No. Keep the flow going. No, anything I would say would be repetitive, because I've always, as I've talked to the young people, I always say, do the work and everything else will fall into place. There's no shortcuts if you're looking for a shortcut. And, and I go back to when I was, say, 24, 25, I say, just listen. I was probably impatient, but I say, just think. You put 5 years in, do it, build a foundation, and you're still only 30. You still have 35, 40 more years to work. So don't try to rush it and have a weak foundation that cracks your whole career. Build the foundation strong and then bounce from there. So it's always tough to get people to think about that, young people, but and Stephen and Ray, I always say to them, listen, the 10% of really good people shine pretty quickly. There's probably, maybe I'm being a little tough to 90%, but there's a lot of people that are lazy or not collaborative or not team players, etc. So if you are all of those things, you will shine and pop out pretty quickly and do well. So just I remember when I taught leadership and crisis management at NYU, I read 20, 25 books on leadership, from Navy SEALs to generals to CEOs to coaches. And it's basically the same 5 things. It's honesty, integrity, communication, collaboration, and open communication, if I haven't said that already. And hard work. I said, doesn't that look simple? Why is it so difficult for people to follow those rules? But they don't, because they're always looking for a shortcut.
I think my comment, and then we do want to have the 25-year question of what would you ask yourself, Stephen, but leaders, I don't know. Do you think leaders are made, Tony? Because I feel like there's an inherent DNA. Anybody put in a leadership position can read all those books, but not everybody's a leader, even if they've done all that. Do you think that you can?
I do think people can be developed, and I think one of the biggest weaknesses of sports and media is no one trains anyone to be a manager or a leader. We throw people into the pool and say, start swimming. There's no mentorship you have people at big agencies that were agents, and all of a sudden they're supposed to manage people. They don't know how to manage people. You have people that are salespeople, no disrespect, that don't know how to manage people. Not you, Ray, but other people. It's like they know how to sell, but they don't know how to manage 25 people in a box. And we don't teach people that. So yeah, the industry, or any industry, needs to do a better job of developing and training and advising and whispering and all those kind of things.
And maybe that's maybe a byproduct of private equity coming into sports, is that you're bringing, particularly with institutional capital, you're bringing more of a professional operational lens to these businesses. So I could speak across the board, as we're always looking at our portfolio and finding ways we could be, help them uplift. And it could be everything from finance to technology to go to market, what have you. Again, we're not there to impose our will, but just say, hey, here's, part of our job, and what I want to do is like, hey, here's what best in class looks like. And FYI, and if you, and once you kind of stack rank yourself, as a company, as a leadership team, like we've got people that can help, get you further along on that journey. And I think, and I think maybe that's a byproduct of, I said, what's going on in the trend of private equity and institutional capital coming into the sports world is that, again, you have people that have certainly an operational mindset, because we're in a market now where money is not free. Money's not free anymore. There's no 0% interest rates, right? And you can't just assume you can do financial engineering and multiple expansion. Like, you've got to actually do the work, right?
Yeah. So let's close out here. Let's close out here with the question about the 25-year-old self, because when you were 25, you didn't have I don't know if you had a mentor. You were your mentor. And so now that you've had mentors, you are a mentor. What's the thing you tell your 25-year-old self at that point? Tony talked about.
That could be another hour, Ray, Tony. But succinctly,
part two.
Succinctly, like I said before, play the long game. Right. It is a long career. A year is a day. It's hard to see that at 25, but I'd shake myself and say yes. And then I would say, also, I think I was very intentional about choosing my bosses. And that sounds kind of strange, saying, well, how do you get to choose your boss? But I just said, I want to be around these people, right? And Tony, your point about proximity and being in the right rooms, like, and I was very fortunate, working for Ted Turner and Mark Lazarus and Mark McCormick and David Stern, may rest in peace. I just knew if I'm just in there, if I'm in their orbit, then good things are probably going to happen. I work hard, to Tony's point, and I show up, like, good things are going to probably happen. And most importantly, I'm going to learn a ton. Right. And I think that's, that to me, like, was the formula. And I try to, I just try to follow that. I felt great about, okay, I'm working for these people. If they can't figure it out, probably no one's going to figure it out. And obviously the learning and just to be fair, like, the learning of what to do and also, like, what not to do. It's not everything that David Stern or any of these other people did that I copy 100%. In some cases, I may do something different, but they got to where they are, all got to where they are for many, many reasons. And to me, I just try to use that as a library, a living library.
Brilliant. I'll just close with one comment. One of the things I was told not to do in 1978 at BBDO by a dear friend who I have to give a call to this week was told, you never wear a short sleeve shirt with a suit that has a vest. I was like 24, and I showed up in this blue suit with a vest, and I took off my jacket and I had shorts. He's like, go buy a shirt right now. Go downstairs. There's a Brooks Brothers across the street.
Dress for the job you want, not dress for the job
you have. Yeah, I thought it was, but who knew? Tony, any last thoughts, comments, concerns?
No, I think this was very insightful, Steven. Thank you. And
it was great.
It's a big business. We all know it's a big business now, and there's a lot of new chefs in the kitchen, and it's going to be important, I think, for everybody to keep an open mind, including, which is one of my pet peeves, executive recruiters. We tend to, as I watch what they do, they pigeonhole sometimes more than the broader community. It's like, get people with varied experience, varied perspective, can bring a new viewpoint to things, because it's a brave new world out there, and it's going to take those kind of minds to keep it ahead, right?
Yeah. I think just having, I think your point, Tony, like, I think traditionally had been kind of an assembly line, right?
Yeah.
Of archetypes of people. And I think that's changing. Back to my comment about the world's not linear. Like, you could go a lot, if you want to be, again, the president of the Knicks, or you want to be the head of Anheuser-Busch marketing, I feel strongly to say there's not one way to get there. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. I told you to go fast, Steven. I don't know. For me, it felt like a day is I don't know how to make the right reverse analogy, but this went really fast within 40 minutes or so. So really great to have you. We thank you for showing up. Wish you a great day.
This has been a lot of fun. Really, really appreciate the invitation.